the feminists among you. The Shakers were the first community to make it a part of their religion to welcome battered wives and children from anywhere in the United States could arrive at the farm. No, and they would explain they were running away from an abusive husband, etc., etc. They would be taken in with their children, no questions asked, fed, housed, given a job. That's how they kept going. And those children were then, male and female children, were raised inside their community, and that's how they survived. And so, but here's the interesting part. All work was organized cooperatively. No division of the employer and the employee. All decisions were made by all the workers together, democratically. One person, one vote. Men and women, together. So there we go. Nowadays, these things are called worker co-ops. It's just a different way of doing it. And human beings have found these attractive and interesting for thousands of years. You all know that feudal relationships also go back thousands of years, and slave relationships go back thousands of years. These things don't happen in nice little periods, one sequential after the other. They all overlap and intermingle. People discover that a certain kind of class structure, a certain kind of organizing production makes sense under certain conditions, and then they embrace that. The death of one system is a moment when people begin searching for alternatives, if they understand that the death of a system is what they're contending with. Of course, if that's out of the question, the system will last forever, they wouldn't ask the question. But I'm doing everything I know how to get you to ask the question, and then I want to provide you with an answer. This cooperative arrangement is an alternative to capitalism. Not only that, it offers a better shot to achieve equality, liberty, fraternity, and democracy than capitalism ever could. Let me hammer at that for a couple of minutes with you. A worker co-op. Let's take a look. And before I do it, I'm talking about a composite of actually existing worker co-ops. Some of you react when I say worker co-op and tell me, lovely idea, but it's sort of a utopian fantasy. No. As I said, it's been around for thousands of years. The Shakers did it, and they did it nicely for a long time. But there are lots of other examples. And if you want the question period, I'll be glad to talk to you. Some of you know about the Mondragon Corporation in the north of Spain. Some of you may know about Emilia-Romagna, this part of Italy, where roughly 40% of the economy is worker co-ops.
Green markets in Oregon.
Yes, there are markets all over the United States. In Northern California, you have the Arizmendi bakeries in the Bay Area. They are another example. The Alvarado Street Bakery is another big example. They're all over. More in other countries than here for all kinds of reasons, but our country has a long history of these experiments and these efforts as well, and they're mushrooming now. So this is not pie in the sky or anything like it. So here's how such a worker co-op, roughly, works. It collectively makes the decisions, what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the profits. Or, to be more accurate, what to do with the surplus that they produce. The people who get the surplus, here we go now, are the same people who produce it. No dichotomy. No producers here and appropriators here. It's the same people. They appropriate their own surplus collectively and then decide what to do with the surplus they've produced. Now, what does this mean? Well, let me give you some examples. If everybody makes the decisions, then the pay scales of everybody are designed and determined collectively and democratically. Now, what will that mean? Who knows? Different communities will decide to have some people earn as much as, well, let's take the example of Mondragon. They have a rule in Mondragon passed by the Assembly of all the workers. By the way, footnote, Mondragon began as a small co-op, 6 workers and a priest. The Spanish priest by the name of Arizmendi, which is why they use that name in the Bay Area for their bakeries. It's an honor of Mr. of Father Arizmendi in the Roman Catholic Church. They started with 6 workers. Today, the Mondragon Corporation has 110, 120,000 workers. By the way, co-ops start small, and then over time, they get big, which shouldn't come as a surprise, because that's precisely the history of capitalism too. All capitalist enterprises started small, and then they became big. I say this with a little sharpness, only because of the number of times I finished a talk, poured my heart and soul out, and had some well-meaning soul come up and say to me, oh yeah, but it's only for 3 or 4 people. No, not at all. The smallness of a co-op now is because it's at the beginning. Every system did that. Co-ops are in no way unique or differential or rendered problematic. Now back to the decision. Mondragon workers decided that the highest paid worker cannot get more than 8.5 times what the lowest paid worker does. So the spread is 8.5 to 1. If you go to Mondragon, a mid-sized city in northern Spain, you will not see beggars on the street. You'll very quickly see this is not a society characterized by anything remotely like the inequality that is normal in capitalist economies around the world, including ours. It turns out, it shouldn't come as a surprise, that if you really want to do something about inequality, change the system. Don't pass a tax that's progressive as opposed to one that's regressive. It won't work. If they don't like the taxes at the top, they get around them. You read the paper every day, it'll tell you how they do it. They've solved that problem. They don't have inequality because they don't allow it. It's like imagining we can't do without child labor. We just have to have child labor. For years we had child labor until here in America it was decided, that's it, no more of that. Turns out, we survived. Can you believe it? No child labor. No child labor. No inequality. Survived that too. They did that because they can. In capitalism, they can't. But in other systems, they can. Here's another example that some of you are interested in ecology. If you're an enterprise and you have a new technology that comes along, a new machine, it really makes more profits. I mean, you really can make a lot more goods with that machine, but it spews all kinds of bad air or bad water into the system. It pollutes. Okay, now you're a capitalist enterprise. You have a board of directors of 15 or 20 people, maybe live 1,000 miles away in Chicago, and they decide we want more profits. So it pollutes the air. Workers are very free, quit, take a job someplace else where the air isn't so bad. But you can never get that kind of result in a co-op. Why? Because those people who are making the decisions, they're right there. This is a very localized operation. They're going to have to live with that air and that water. So will their spouse and their children and their neighbors and their friends. They might go for the higher profit, but they're going to think about it in a very different way and much more likely often make a decision to forgo the profit because they have to calculate all the costs of the sickness and the risk and the health problems that go with it. And here's the one I like best. You can make more profit if you close your production in California and you move to Bangladesh. Dhaka has a minimum wage, I think, of $40 a month or something in that neighborhood. And who can compete with that? So the capitalist says, of course, I'm closing in Glendale and I'm moving to Shanghai. But if you put that question to the workers in Glendale, not going to happen. They're not moving to Shanghai. They're going to solve the problem of that business and its competitive strategy some other way. That's out. Just like companies couldn't anymore solve their competitive problems by hiring children. That's out. In a co-op, all kinds of things are out. All kinds of things are out. What a remarkable idea. And then there comes the surplus that all the workers together have produced. How is it going to be used? For what? Well, here's something you can be sure no co-op is ever going to do. It's not going to give one person a fantastic salary, a fantastic payoff of dividends, while everybody else is having trouble paying for their kid to go to college. Whatever they do, the inequality of distribution of that surplus will be nothing like what it is in capitalism. Wow. And now give me one more that really ought to clinch it. This is a society that says it's committed to democracy. The idea that if you're affected by a decision, you therefore have the right to participate in making the decision since you live with the results. That's why we elect the congressperson and the mayor and all that, because we know they make decisions that impact us if we live in that jurisdiction, and so we have at least some voting power over them. Well, the place that is just as important in your life, probably more, is your workplace. 5 out of 7 days you go to work. You get up in the morning, you brush your teeth, you get ready for work, and then you go to work, and then you work, and then you recoup from work, right? You recoup. You go to a place where they give you something called a happy hour, which helps you understand what the previous hours must have been. You don't ask those kinds of questions. You simply enjoy 11 beers in a 45-minute and stagger home. Right? So you do understand that in this crazed system, the place you work at has no democracy in it, and it never did. You live in a society that congratulates itself every day 1,000 times, in the words of every politician, left, right, and center, about the democracy we don't have. Is stunning. Democracy at the workplace, that's a co-op. That's what it means. The slogan of co-ops these days is democratize the enterprise. Yeah, but that's it. That's what they do. We've never done that. We are currently fighting wars in half a dozen countries, bringing to them a democracy we don't have. Stunning. Stunning. No, seriously. And the reason I hammer at it is not just to play on the terms of democracy and the point that it really does make, but there's a more political message here. Americans for 50 years have been trained to think about capitalism and socialism in ways that have nothing to do with what we've been talking about. They are prepared to give you long rehearsed arguments about how awful it is for the government to do this, or how awful it is for the government to do that, because in their mind, socialism is what governments do. Notice, please, that I've been talking to you about capitalism and an alternative in which the word and the concept of the government never arose. When I say, let's democratize the workplace, which I do all over the country, I can tell in my conservative and right-wing audiences, because I have those, they find this very interesting. Why? They've not been prepared for this. This way of approaching a critique of capitalism is not the one they were ready to refute. We have found a way to get into the American consciousness, because what they prepared for is not the battle we're fighting. I'm not advocating the government do anything. That's not necessary for what I'm talking about. Would we need to have some government support for a growth deal? You betcha, of course. But I'm not talking about the government running anything. I'm not talking about the government control. It's not the issue. Socialism should never have been identified that way. We have to learn not just from what's wrong with capitalism, but if I had more time, I would talk to you about what we have to learn about the mistakes made by socialists. And there are plenty of them. We have to learn what not to do, because some of the things they did didn't work out real well, to be as kind about it as I can. The focus on the government is what 50 years of anti-left propaganda have trained people to push back against. There's been no training to push back against the worker co-op. In fact, for most people, if you say the words worker co-op, there's no negative reaction at all. They basically want to know what you're talking about. But it's an open question. It's an open interest that is not. And once I talk about it a little bit, it becomes a positive interest, and that's particularly true with people under 35 who don't have the history. Anyway, let me bring this to a conclusion. I've taken more time than I should. I think a new system is possible. I think that capitalism's decline and dissolution, which I see around me, is well underway. And so I want to conclude with a couple of comments on that and then open it up. One of the corrections, if you like, to the notion that capitalism is dissolving that I can make, and I want to make before leaving the topic, is to make you aware of a geographic difference here. Where capitalism is collapsing is here, in North America, Western Europe, and Japan. Its old centers, the places where it grew up, the places where it concentrated the building of factories and stores and warehouses and offices. For 200 years it did that and made the rest of the world a colonial backwater, providing raw materials, food, people, shipping them into the centers. And the centers became wealthy and the peripheries became poor, creating those notions of center periphery associated with Samir Amin and others, people that you're familiar with. But over the last 30 years, 40 years, that has radically altered. Capitalists discovered in the 1970s and 80s that they didn't have to anymore concentrate their investments in the old centers. Having done that for 200 years, they had to come to an accommodation with the working classes there. There were powerful struggles, you know all about them, that produced social democracy in Europe, the New Deal here, and good wages as the deal. Rip off the colonials, pay the wages here.